Welcome to this rules presentation, basically covering the new rules, except that we will have some questions afterwards because we don't expect the new rules to take too long. As you can see, we're carrying out this presentation under the constraints of COVID, so I guess it's not going to be quite as easy or quite as smooth as it would be in normal circumstances, but we'll do the best we can, and please bear with us. The way we're going to work this is that I will go through the main rule changes. After each section of rule changes, Ben and I will have a discussion about the way that will impact your sailing, and there's the opportunity for people at home on Zoom to come in with any questions. When we've finished all the significant rule changes, we'll be taking some questions which you have already submitted, and we'll be going through those. And if there are any more questions, depending on how much time we have, we may manage to get some more things done. Okay, so with no more ado, let's get on. Okay, so as I said, well, let me again and say it's intended for all racing sailors. There's no prerequisites in terms of rules knowledge, although I'm sure many of you will have a pretty good understanding of the rules. We'll be going through the changes to the rules. We're not going to go through all the rules which haven't been changed. So if you've got questions about those, please let us know, and we will answer some questions which you have sent in before the seminar. Okay. Right. So the subject we're going to cover some general matters as far as rules and the changes are concerned. We're going to look at some changes to the definitions which have a significant impact in this new set of rules. We're going to go through each of the rules which have changed, or at least the major ones. There are some smaller ones which we're not going to cover. And then we're going to look at how the race officer, the changes to the race officer procedures, including some new flags. Okay, so let's go through the general thing. The rules are effective the 1st of January. Normally, new rules become effective at the beginning of the year after the Olympic cycle. But of course, the Olympics have been delayed this year. Nonetheless, World Sailing has decided to go ahead with the new rules as from the 1st of January. Now, let me just remind you that the rules include the class rules. So there's no need for sailing instructions or notice of race to say that class rules are included, because they are always included in the racing rules of sailing. There are some HKSF prescriptions which will apply on top of the rules. You need to be aware of those and to see whether they apply for the event, particularly an international event, and see if there are any changes. And the rules include the sailing instructions and the notice of race. So just a few things in the sailing instructions. A new HKSF prescription is that hails must be in English unless the sailing instructions say otherwise. The rules actually say that if in a mixed language environment, that hails may be in other than English. But we believe that to avoid confusion, all hails should be in English in Hong Kong. Otherwise, we won't know which events are in English and which ones aren't. And also, don't forget that the sailing instructions may change certain of the racing rules. So it's important to read the sailing instructions and see if anything has been changed before you start a race. Okay? So let's look at the changes to the definitions. The first one is that under the new rules, a boat starts or finishes when its hull first crosses the line. So in the previous set of rules, it was not clearly defined when the boat started, but when the boat finished was when the equipment in the normal position crossed the line. So under the new rules, it's purely the hull. So the crew and equipment don't count. The bowsprit doesn't count. And Ben will talk in a minute about a few more things about the definition of what's in the hull. There are some other rules which refer to hull, and I think it's worthwhile dealing or just mentioning those so that people understand. First of all, the zone is defined as 3 hull lengths. It always has been 3 hull lengths, so that doesn't change. So the zone refers to the hull length. Overlaps refer to crew or equipment. So a bowsprit can contribute to creating an overlap. So that's a variation from the hull. And the only other place where the hull length applies is when there's Rule 18 commenced, Rule 18.2b, that's establishing an overlap or not having an overlap as the boats enter the zone. The rule says when the boat first enters the zone. There is no definition as to whether that's the bowsprit or the spinnaker, if it's on a run, or whether it's just the hull. But I think it's pretty safe to say that most people's understanding of what 3 boat lengths is pretty vague anyway, and that you can take it that it's the first bit of the boat that gets into the zone, so the spinnaker if it's on the run. Okay. Oh, wait a minute, Ben, what do you think about the hull length?
So just to put it in perspective, this rule was really changed to make it easier for the race officers. You imagine a race officer looking at the start line, seeing a whole load of bowsprits, boats with wings, maybe outriggers and trapezes. And it's very difficult for the race officer to determine when that boat is actually over the line, isn't it? So what they've done is they've said, okay, let's take all of those appendages or people out at the start line, and we're just going to make it easier for the race officers by allowing them to look at the hull, and it makes them easier at the finish line as well. Some people would argue that if a boat with a long bowsprit, she could actually be more advanced at the start and gain advantage over her competitors with a short bowsprit, but actually that all cancels out at the finish, where she has to sail that little bit longer to get her hull over the finish line. Some of you may have heard of a document called the Equipment Rules of Sailing. It's a little bit like the racing rules of sailing, but it's all about the equipment we use. And it's in there that we will find the definition of a hull and also some diagrams which explain exactly what we've been saying. So the Equipment Rules of Sailing, the ERS, is available online at the World Sailing website.
So in simple terms then, when a boat has a moulded in bowsprit, not one which is just bolted on deck, is that included in the hull, or is it?
That's been the topic of many a discussion online. So the moulded in bowsprit, yes, it's difficult to know whether that is part of the hull or not. And I think the Equipment Rules of Sailing actually make that clear that the hull is sort of an extension of the upper part of the bow, cutting off that mould. Is that right?
That's my understanding.
Yeah.
But it does mean that if you have a bowsprit, you should look at the Equipment Rules of Sailing and understand how that applies to your boat.
Absolutely. And there are diagrams in that document which help people. So I think the rule is actually good. I think it's going to allow for fairer starts and fairer finishes. Anything else on that one? No. Oh, well, just one more thing. I think for the question of when do we get into the zone, anyone who has a rule book on them, I think it actually is the hull because of the last sentence of the definition of zone, which says a boat is in the zone when any part of the hull is in the zone. So I think we use the hull again for that one. What do you think?
Well, under 18.2b, it says when a boat first enters the zone.
Right. Okay.
It doesn't say the hull first enters the zone.
Right. Okay.
I think it's a bit academic. We will try to look at case studies and see whether a question is asked on that and let you all know about that later.
Okay. Just a point, Tom. If people have a question on what we're talking about on the new rules, I think how could we ask them to type it, maybe? Do we have a chat feature? We'll see if somehow we can answer any questions as we're going along. We don't want to draw that too long, but if you do have a question, try the typing chat on Zoom here. Okay.
Okay, well, the next new definition is that sailing the course has been brought in as a definition. And under the current rules, the definition of course is defined in Rule 28. But now the definition of sailing the course is put under definitions. And it uses the same terminology in defining the course, which is the string rule. So everybody's familiar with that. The significance of this is that a race officer can score a boat not sailing the course, and the abbreviation for that used in scoring is NSC, without having to have a protest or a hearing. We know that in the past there have been incidences where a boat has not sailed the course, no other boat has protested it, and the race committee has left the protest too late, and the boat initially at least has got away with not sailing the course properly. Well, now the race officer can score the boat NSC without. Sorry, is somebody trying to get in? Okay.
Bob, that is on, it says Leslie. That's Bob who's on.
That's all right. Let's just keep
Okay, now, if a boat has been improperly scored NSC, it has the opportunity for seeking redress under the normal redress procedure. But there is a time limit on submitting requests for redress, which may be defined in the sailing instructions or maybe in the rules. But what that means is that boats really have to check the results when they're posted on the board. That's going to be a bit of an imposition, but then boats often need to check the results anyway to see if they're being protested, so they can do the two things at the same time. So the request for redress has to be submitted within the time. It may be that the evidence is given to the race committee after the event is finished, perhaps a day before the prize giving, that a boat missed the mark out, probably a boat on the podium has missed the mark out. And the race officer is entitled under the new rule to change the scoring for him to be scored NSC, not sailing the course.
those people who remember the old rules will remember that if the race committee saw a boat miss the mark or sail the wrong course, then they would have to protest them, would have to have a hearing just to get them out of the race. So again, it's another rule which should make things easier for us, but it does put more of an onus on the competitor to check their score, check the board as soon as they can afterwards, or else they run out of time to complain about it, doesn't it? So again, I think it's a good one. It makes it easier. The race officers amongst you will be loving this new rule because it saves you a whole lot of time at the end of the day. Okay.
Okay, let's press on. Right, the next rule, I refer to it under Rule 1.1, but it actually is a principle that applies throughout the new rules, which is that support persons are included in the rules and are as responsible as the competitors for the behaviour of the support people and the boats or vessels that they're on. So support persons must give assistance when required if there is a boat who is in difficulty. I think very sensible. I'm sure most support people would have done that anyway.
It always makes me wonder why they would have to write this in. Was there a support person once that didn't? Of course, if you are on the water and you have a boat and someone needs assistance, you should be part of the rescue team if you can. And this rule change simply brings them into the rules as competitors or as anyone else in the race management team being a rescue person.
Okay, let's press on. Now we get to a slightly more significant rule change. In the last set of rules, there was a change which said that a boat penalised under Rule 2 could be either disqualified or be scored DNE. That's a disqualification not excludable. So that means that the score has to be included in the final tally of the week's points, and it can't be excluded as a thrower. In fact, I don't think any situations arose where people ever used the straight DSQ for a boat that broke Rule 2. Normally, a boat that's broken Rule 2 has broken another rule as well, and so they've been scored, they've been disqualified under the other rule, and the Rule 2 penalty is sort of on top of the penalty for another rule. So let's just clarify that a boat that is found to have broken Rule 2 will be scored DNE. Okay. Right. The next one refers to Rule 16.2, which is the limitation on a right-of-way boat changing course. There is a question about this, so we will be dealing with this in a little bit more length later on. It's sometimes referred to as a hunting rule. The old Rule 16.2 said that if a port boat had borne away to go behind a starboard boat, then the starboard boat could not then alter course if the port boat had to change course immediately to keep clear. Now, the rule has been partly left. This rule now only applies on a beat to windward. So off-wind situations remain the same, that a port boat intending or changing course to go behind the starboard boat is protected from the starboard boat immediately changing course and hunting it, but not on a beat to windward. Now, of course, if there is a collision, then the starboard boat bears responsibility for the collision if the boat changes course. Okay. Any comments, Ben?
No, but I think this whole 16.2 is a funny rule because it doesn't really come up in our normal day-to-day fleet racing, although it can do. The 16.2 is there to stop that America's Cup style dial down in match racing in fleet races where it could become dangerous. But it's not really a very common rule. We don't see this in the protest room much, do we?
No, but it does apply in team racing. So it's important that the team racers are aware of the change.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, I wasn't going to go into details of this because this really is a technicality, but we have been asked a question about it. I'll cover it briefly, and we can cover it in more deep depth when we get into the question stage. The rule says that when a boat has been given marked room, the whole of Rule 18 turns off. Under the old rule, or the current rule, when a boat has been given marked room, Rule 18.2b turns off, but the rest of Rule 18 remains the same. So if a boat had been given marked room, the boat giving the marked room had complied with its obligations, and then later the original giveaway boat acquired an overlap inside the original right-of-way boat, then Rule 18.2a applied. So the original keep clear boat suddenly becomes a right-of-way boat. So that's all pretty confusing. It's quite a complex rule anyway, and it was just thought more sensible to turn the whole rule off once a boat has been given marked room. Now, I said I'd talk about it later, but maybe we should just expand it a little bit more now while we have the diagram on the screen. The definition of marked room is that the boat who is entitled to marked room is allowed to sail to the mark and then to sail its proper course round the mark. Now, in this situation, the blue boat is entitled to marked room because there was no overlap. It was clear ahead as it first entered the zone. But in position 3 of the blue boat, it has already been given marked room because its proper course in position 3 is to sail straight across the screen. You can see the arrow which shows the direction of the next mark. So the blue boat's proper course is not to go any closer to the mark than it already is in position 3. It has to bear away and sail straight for its new mark. So the yellow boat in position 3 has given the blue boat the marked room that it's entitled to. The blue boat is no longer entitled to luff up closer to the mark than it was in position 3. And under the old rules, the yellow boat was quite entitled to go in between the blue boat and the mark and to claim marked room under Rule 18.2a. So it's, as I said, it's a bit technical. It doesn't happen very often, but it's one of those loopholes which the rule makers wanted to plug.
It was never the intention when they made this that the marked room would change during the one instance of Rule 18. And the old rules, the rules that we have at the moment, have that change where initially the blue boat is entitled to the marked room, and then in the same instance of that landing, the yellow boat is. And this is what they're trying to plug, is now the blue boat has been given marked room, it's all off, and it only starts again when they go out or they re-enter the zone or something like that. So it is a technical loophole that's been plugged. I don't think it will change our sailing that much.
Most people were probably completely unaware of it
in the first place.
Anyway.
Yeah. So anyway, let's keep going with that because it's
okay. Right. If you're on a beat to windward and there is another boat to windward of you and you need to tack to avoid an obstruction, you have always been allowed to hail the room to tack, and the windward boat has to respond either by saying you tack or tacking himself, and that's the way it has always worked for a number of rules cycles. There have been a number of protests where the Windward boat has said he didn't hear the hail attack, the hail for water, and so the rule has changed to say that if there's a doubt about whether the hail could be heard, the boat calling for room to attack must make a signal. Now, within the rule itself, it doesn't at the moment define what that signal is. The rule says the sailing instructions may define what the signal is, but it doesn't say what it is. So I think as a reasonable rule of thumb, boats should be using the match racing signals for hail, which is to wave an arm to windward when you want to tack, and to make an obvious gesture if you want the other boat to cross in front of you. I think that it's something we should do in HKSF to make that clear, to either require the SIs to say something or to put it in as a new prescription. But the problem with the rule is it's up to the hailing boat to make sure that it's heard or to make the signal. Any comments, Ben?
No, I think they said they deliberately didn't write in what that signal is, to leave it up to the clubs around the world to decide, depending on the event. So if you imagine two huge J boats, 100 foot or more, shouting room to tack might not be appropriate. They might be so many boat lengths apart. And so for that competition, it might be that the club or the organizers prescribe that people should call for room to tack using a radio. On the other hand, in a very noisy opti fleet on a busy windy day with sails crackling, it also might not be enough just to shout room to tack. And so therefore the sailing instructions might prescribe a signal. Some of you might be watching the America's Cup this weekend, and you'll notice that they're not shouting room to tack to each other, they have a light signal. So there's many different ways that it might be done depending on the type of event. But as Tom just said, the rules don't actually define what the signal should be, in which case it's left up to the sailor to make sure, as it says up on the board there, to make sure he is heard or even understood. Now, in team racing and match racing, they do use a signal which is to point to windward, something like that means room to tack, and the other boat points to them and waves them across. That could be enough to be understood in a normal sailing day. But whatever it is, if you want room to tack, you do have to now do a bit more than just shouting the signal. Anything to add on that?
Yeah. Okay. Right. Under the existing rules, there are a number of places where exoneration is mentioned. Exoneration being where a boat breaks a rule and is forced to break a rule because of the other boat breaking a rule. So whether it's a boat that hits a mark because he wasn't given mark room, or various other things, there have been exonerations spread throughout the rules. Now, all the exonerations are now grouped together in Rule 43.1. There is most of them are exactly as they are in the current rules. It's just that the place where they're defined is different. There is one slight change, which is that you can be exonerated under the existing rules. A right-of-way boat can be exonerated for breaking Rule 14 if the damage is minor. Now, that has been added to that, as well as a right-of-way boat, a boat taking the room it's entitled to, the marked room it's entitled to, is also exonerated. So even though it's not a right-of-way boat, it may be entitled to marked room, And if in the course of that there is an incident resulting in minor damage, then the boat can be exonerated from Rule 14. There's one further thing which is included in the rules, but I don't think anybody ever has taken a penalty on the water if they think they're going to be exonerated. But it makes it clear in the rule that you don't have to take a penalty if you're going to seek protest and seek exoneration.
It's just a wording thing, isn't it? The old rules said that if you're going to be exonerated, you shall be exonerated, whereas the new rules for exoneration say you are, or the boat is exonerated, present tense, which makes it more clear that you don't need to take a penalty if you think you are exonerated. Well, the other boat might not agree, but there we go.
Of course, if the protest committee finds that you weren't entitled to exoneration and you didn't take a penalty, then you will be in trouble, eventually disqualified. Okay? Right. There's a new rule 37, which gives us a new flag, and I'll talk about that in a minute when we talk about race officer flags. The old rule about dropping trash has been renumbered to number 47 and now includes support persons. So if your support boat drops its sandwich bags overboard, then it can be penalised. Now the penalty is not defined. It might be exclusion of the support boat from the event, or if it's a really serious infringement, it might be reflected in an infringement on the boat or boats that the support boat is supporting. But once again, the rules have brought the support boats in under the rules, so support boats have to comply with them. Support boats in this term includes not just coaches, but it would include parents or other people looking after optimists. So anybody supporting who's identified as supporting a competitor is governed by the rules. Okay. Right. The race committee changes. Well, we've already mentioned the not sailing the course penalty, so I won't go through that again. There's one new flag and a slightly better defined use of some old flags. So the B flag will be flown when the race committee is in doubt about safety and it requires all boats to monitor communications in case there are safety instructions. So that's all boats, including support boats. The orange flag has commonly been used for one end of the starting line, and the finish line was left in the current rules a little bit more vague. Sometimes it's been an orange flag, sometimes it's a blue flag, sometimes both. The new rule makes it clear that one end of the finish line is signalled by a blue flag, so not the orange flag. Ben, have you got any comments on either of those?
No, I think in Hong Kong we're all used to that orange flag being one end of the start line, and as you say, the blue flag was always maybe just on station, but it was never actually the line was between the blue flag and the other end. It's going to be interesting to see what organisers do if they shorten courses and all this. I guess all the shortened course boats have to have blue flags on them now,
Yeah.
and this kind of thing. But yeah, the actual exact point of the finish line now goes from one end of the finish line to the blue flag.
Okay, right, next one. Okay, so that's actually it. So it's not a big, a lot of topics to cover. So most of the current rules still apply. The rules have been tidied up and some technicalities resolved. There are one or two other minor changes which I haven't mentioned, but nothing significant. There's now no need for a boat to progress another boat for not sailing the course, which is an excellent change, and support boats are brought into the rules. So that's the end of the presentation on the new rules. Ben, have you got anything you want to add to it?
No, I'm just looking through. One interesting one is actually Rule 41, which used to have something about if you gain advantage when you get help, outside assistance, you may be penalized. And what they've done is they've actually taken that out of the outside assistance rule to encourage you to get the help if you need it. So people must have been saying, no, don't help me on, and my man overboard can sit there for a little bit longer, we don't need help, for fear of being penalized. Whereas actually the rule makers, they want you to take that help. So they've taken out the penalty for gaining assistance, the absolute penalty for taking assistance. Just they've deleted that line, which is quite interesting.
Well, on that same topic, if your crew, one of your crew falls overboard, it always used, under the existing rules, is the case that you couldn't continue racing until the guy was back on board. Under the new rules, he or she has to be in contact with the boat. So it's not quite clear what that means, if he's just touching it, or if he's holding on to it, or it just says in contact with the boat. Of course, if he's swimming and trying to push you over the finish line, you might be penalised under Rule 42.
Yeah, but I think generally the rule changes are good. There's many more changes, which of course we haven't gone through today. You know, spelling mistakes, grammar, renumbering, this kind of thing. So if you do want to go and look at the full extent of the rule changes, I suggest you go to the World Sailing website and download the rule book, or you could even go to the ship shop and I encourage people to have a paper copy on them. I'm not trying to sell, I'm not trying to promote or anything, but having a paper copy of the rule book is really a great way of being able to keep up to date, find the rules quickly. You buy it once in 4 years. This rule book produced by the Hong Kong Sailing Federation also includes at the back the Hong Kong National Prescription in the yellow. So the specific Hong Kong rules are in the back, which also are part of our rules that we race to as well in Hong Kong. So it's actually not a bad book at all.
Yes, so that book also includes a line beside any rule that's changed, any new rules. So if you want to do it quickly, you can read through it and just look for the places with the line alongside them, and that will show you the changes. But on the other hand, most of us will probably need to read the rules from time to time to bring ourselves up to date.
Okay.
Okay, well now we're into the question and answer time. Have we got any questions which have come in on the Zoom?
No. Everyone either too overwhelmed by it all, or we've answered all the questions, but there's no questions at the moment on the chat. So if you do have a question, do go ahead and type it in, and we might be able to answer it tonight.
Okay, otherwise you've got some questions that have been sent in, so let's take one or two of those.
So the other part of this session was going to be an open Q&A.
I have a question.
I'll go. Okay, who's that? Bob.
Question. Bob.
Hi, Bob.
Hi, Bob.
Go ahead and ask the question. We'll see what
Yeah,
we-
it's me.
Yeah, go
Can
ahead.
you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. You said the new rules mean that if someone falls overboard, you can finish as long as they're in contact with the boat.
Correct.
Okay. What happens if they fall? What happens if they're trimming the spinnaker and they fall over, but they hang on to the spinnaker sheet, and you finish with a crew member being dragged alongside the boat holding onto a sheet? Does that mean that's okay?
Well, it's not defined in the rules what in contact with the boat is. But my view is that if he's holding on to part of the boat's equipment, which is attached to the boat, then he's in contact with the boat. What do you think, Ben?
Yes, I think in contact is in contact with the crew or the boat. It's
Okay.
one of those ones which hasn't really come up yet.
I mean, the new rules are always questions and answers.
We need.
And
I'll try and get one of my crew to jump overboard, holding onto a sheet at the finish, and see how
okay,
it goes.
as I say, don't just make sure he's not swimming and towing you across the finish line.
Okay. So we do have one.
Understood. Thank you.
You're welcome. We do have one question there, just to go in a bit more detail into that mark room question.
Well, there's Harry's question.
Yes,
Well, why don't we go back to the slide if you can, Ian, on 18. Because we've got a diagram there that we could use to talk about it.
Yeah, just no, keep going. I'll tell you which one. Down. Number 10. Yeah.
Yep. Okay.
So under the old rule, in this slide, which you're going to get in just a moment.
So. Yeah.
Okay. I think you can all see the slide again. Under the old rule, the blue boat, because she is clear ahead as she enters the zone, is entitled to mark room under 18.2b. Mark room, as Tom said earlier, is room for the blue boat to sail to the mark and then sail her proper course. That is the course she would normally sail to finish as fast as she could after that once she gets to the mark. Now, if you look at the blue boat, forget the yellow boat for the moment, in position 1, she's entitled to sail, to turn towards that mark, to sail towards that mark. That's in her mark room. In position 2, she's entitled to sail and turn a little bit more. But in position 3 and 4, she actually isn't entitled really to turn up anymore. The course to the next mark is completely due to the east there. And in position 3, and definitely in position 4, you would all agree that luffing at this point was not her proper course. So some people would say, okay, well, in position 3 and 4, she's been given the mark room by the time she gets there to sail to the next mark, in which case mark room for her is over. From the position of the yellow boat, who had to give a mark room initially in 1, initially in 2, when she gets to position 3 and definitely in position 4, she now becomes overlapped inside. The problem was the old rules, once mark room was over, switched off that whoever came first into the zone bit 18.2b, but left on by accident in the way they've written the rules 18.2a, which says an inside boat is entitled to mark room. So what happened was you had the blue boat getting mark room at the beginning, and then in the same instance of that rounding, the yellow boat suddenly is entitled to mark room, and that wasn't what they wanted. So the way they did that was to say, if mark room has been given, all of Rule 18 is off completely. No more mark room while you do that rounding. So I hope that explains a little bit the loophole that they've closed. There was never an intention to have the mark room changing during the same instance, a single instance of a rounding from one boat to another. It's dangerous and it's confusing. I hope that answers that one. I'm just looking to the chat for another question there. So the question is, it says you mentioned not having to protest a boat for not sailing the course. The committee boat can do that, but what if you're out of sight of the committee boats? Let's be clear about what the rule for NSC is. It's empowering the committee boat not to have to launch a protest. But if you are another boat and you see your competitor not sailing the course, you still need to protest them. Is that,
Well, you can, you don't, yes.
yeah,
I mean, under the old situation, there were too many instances where a boat had not sailed the course properly, and there was absolutely nothing that anybody can do about it because they weren't protested either by the committee boat or by a competitor. So under the new situation, a protest doesn't have to be lodged. The committee boat can just score them in the same way that they would score somebody who was over the line at start.
OCS or something
So
like that.
OCS and NSC are effectively the same type of penalty.
If you're a race officer out there, the question comes, what happens if someone walks up to you and says, I saw boat 1, 2, 3 not sailing the course? I'm not sure whether that would be a strong, you'd have to weigh up how good their evidence is. And there's discussion whether the race committee can do this on third-party report. I would say a race committee would probably be wise to limit using this to their own first-hand, or at least their marked boats or whatever, people impartially reporting that.
Well, I'm not sure I completely agree with you there, Ben, because if it's reported to the race committee outside protest time, then I think the race committee, it would be reasonable for the race committee to have an inquiry and to establish what the evidence was that the boat hadn't sailed the course properly, and to deal with it accordingly.
Yeah.
There was a situation of, without, obviously don't want to mention names, but there was a situation in a very high profile race in Hong Kong a few years ago where somebody failed to sail properly around a mark on the far side of Hong Kong Island and won the round the island race, or that division in the round the island race, and there was no protest. The race committee didn't know about it and nobody else protested.
No, right.
In the end, it was dealt with there was an international jury who did deal with it, but it's a tricky situation. So this resolves a lot of problems.
Just continuing on this question then, I mean, let's say the race committee has posted the results at 9 o'clock, but you don't see them until 10 o'clock the next morning. How does that work? Well, I think, again, this is all to be tested in real life, and I'm sure we're going to have cases where these questions are put to a jury who can mull it over over many minutes. But what it does is it does put the onus on the competitors to check up. Having said that, I think we had a chat the other day, didn't we, and wondered whether we should put some of that onus back onto the race committee somehow to inform the boats. So I'm not 100% sure how that's going to play out.
We're all in a sort of a bit of a learning phase here.
Yeah.
And I just remind you that if there's a good reason why somebody didn't see the results until the next morning, and therefore was late putting in the request for redress, the protest committee will extend the time limit.
Yeah. I'm not sure whether that answers the question that was given to us, but I think that yeah, we do have to use our common sense of it as competitors and committees, protest committees and race committees. So look, I think that's all the questions on the chat. Shall we
go for one
of these questions? And I want to actually set this one up on the board.
Okay, which one is it? Give me
it's the bottom line. I'll show you what we are setting up here.
What's question 3?
Yeah.
Okay.
So we're just going to, one of the questions has come into us, and I'll read it to you in a moment. So this is the kind of thing we're looking at.
Okay, so this is what's happening.
Could we use blue instead of red?
Don't have
Or green instead of red, just to make that stand out a bit more. Sorry, it's green instead of yellow. My bad.
Okay, well, I've got, it refers to some other boats, so the other boats.
No, I'm talking about this one.
Okay, so these are other boats coming across.
Okay, yeah, I see what you mean.
Right, okay, so that's the situation.
Okay, so this is a windward mark. I'm gonna need a piece of paper. The question is, I was on port tack at the windward mark with another boat on port tack just behind me and to windward. So the person here is on the yellow boat, and there's a boat on his weather hip coming up to the windward mark. Just maybe approaching, okay. He sailed beyond the ley line and prevented me from tacking. Yellow boat can't tack because the green boat is there. Maybe we can bring the boats just as they're coming a beam from the mark and put a zone in there or something. There we go.
Okay.
Now, the yellow boat's come here, wants to tack, but can't tack. Meanwhile, and they remained in that position as they went past the ley line. Meanwhile, those two red boats come steaming in and gain many places, and the yellow boat is still being sailed off to wherever that is, Japan. So the question is, was he within his rights to sail me on? Was it fair sailing? Is there anything I could have done within the rules to force him to tack so that I could round the mark? I hope you'll understand that. That's the windward mark. The yellow boat is pinned, can't tack, and the red boat's getting behind him.
Yeah, if the yellow boat tacks, then he's breaking rule 13. He's a giveaway boat tacking in front of another boat.
Okay, so the question, I mean, let's take it even, what can the yellow boat luff? Can the
yellow boat can go head to wind.
So the yellow boat can go head to wind in order to, but he can't go past head to wind because then he's now attacking boat.
Right, and the green boat has to go head to wind as well, because he has to keep clear of the yellow boat.
When they approached the mark, Tom, even before they got to the zone, the yellow was clear ahead, even before the zone. You might need to put a zone on there. Can you put a zone on that diagram? I think we can take the two red ones out for the moment. Okay, so actually the yellow boat entered the zone clear ahead. So doesn't mark room give her any rights?
No.
Okay, so would you like to explain why mark room doesn't help the yellow boat at the moment, even though she entered the zone?
Well, the inside boat is the green boat. So if there's any mark room to be given, it's
clear ahead.
Okay, so it's clear ahead. So neither boat, there's no mark room enters the situation for either boat.
Okay. And also, even if it did, the yellow can't use that mark room because she's going to pass head to wind.
Well, because the green boat has got the mark room, if there were overlaps. The yellow boat couldn't squeeze the green boat above the mark because the green boat is tied with mark.
What about the question about the fair sailing? Is the green boat entitled to do that under fair sailing?
Well,
is it fair that the green can take this yellow boat onwards and let these other two boats pass?
I guess the question is whether there's any question of team racing in this situation. If there was a situation where the green boat was deliberately doing it to allow one of the red boats to win the race, then there might be a fair sailing situation.
Yeah, but I think there's nothing in the rules to say that the Green can't do that if it
No.
improves her own score in the race. And then
No,
that's
I mean, he probably wouldn't win a protest for fair sailing because the green boat can. There is a case on this that what the green boat can do. The green boat can basically do almost anything as long as it improves his own position in the race or series.
Yeah. So
the yellow boat has just got to wait. His best bet is to sail ahead to win and see what happens. I mean, in a famous one that we can't show you the film of, the yellow boat actually ends up coming round like that.
So just to summarize, I think, thanks Tom, just to summarize for those of you, it was a port tack approach to the windward mark. The boat, in this case green, was slightly astern, but close enough to the yellow that the yellow couldn't tack, and the green was entitled to actually continue sailing past the mark as long as she wants. So long as she's not doing it because it's trying to help one of her friends, she must be trying to help herself, in which case she can do it. All right?
Right.
I hope that answers that question. Some of you may remember 2000 Olympics, and exactly that happened with Ben Ainsley and Robert Scheid in the final of the 2000 Laser Olympics. Okay, any other questions? Well, we have another question. This is an interesting one, which is, what is a rounding mark compared to a passing mark? And I think that's quite a good question because sometimes we see people getting those two confused.
Okay.
Just ask the question again. The question is, what's the difference between a rounding mark and a passing mark? And you'll see that in our current rules in Rule 28, but you'll also see it in the new rules in the definition of sailing the course.
Okay, so this is the course to sail to 2, 3, 4 is a passing mark and 1 is a rounding mark.
The yellows are quite hard to see, but maybe you can write the numbers next to them. Yeah, it's quite hard to see those numbers.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Okay.
Now, right, let's have a port rounding, which is more normal. So if we draw the string, it's now in that situation, all of those marks are rounding marks. If you took any one of them away, so if you went directly from 1 to 3, then the string has not been diverted. If the string is diverted by a mark, it's a rounding mark. So if the string goes straight to there, 2 has no effect. You might well have 2 to port, which is that one, 3 to port, which is that one, and it might say 4 to starboard. So the course it's that, and there's a big island here. So 4 is in there to prevent boats from getting too close to the island. So in this situation, 4 is a passing mark because it doesn't divert the string.
So very often you'll see in the course description, they may put a little p next to that mark. Maybe we'll put that in red just underneath, just to show people
Okay.
underneath yeah.
So the course is 2p, well, I've done it, 3p, 4s.
Yeah, and then just something to signify 4 is a passing mark and not a rounding mark.
Sorry, yeah, 4 is s. Yeah, we need 2p's, don't we?
Yeah. There we go. So these are
That's a rounding mark,
Yeah.
that's a rounding
rounded
mark,
mark.
and that's a rounding mark.
Okay, so you can see on this course, you have the mark 1 is a rounding mark. The string must touch that mark. 2 is also a rounding mark. The string, when pulled taut, must touch that one. 3 is also a rounding mark. The string must touch that one. But 4, leave it to starboard, but it's a passing mark. The string from the back of your boat does not have to touch the passing mark. So you just have to sail on the correct side of it, but when the string's pulled taut, it doesn't have to touch it. So I hope that makes a difference. Again, the definition of sailing the course lets you know a little bit about rounding marks and passing marks.
Okay.
We'll leave that diagram up for a moment, and maybe anyone has a question on that. Let's find another question. We've been going an hour, so maybe a couple more, and then. Okay. There's a question here on 18.3. Maybe we just go over 18.3 just to help people. 18.3 is passing head to wind and tacking in the zone. What's the new words for it? New name. Passing head to wind in the zone. So we're just going to explain 18.3. The question was had some quite a long piece of text to go with it, but I think if we just try and explain 18.3 from start to finish, it might help people here.
Okay, then, there you go.
Yeah. So as we can see, the yellow boat there. Oh, we do have a blue boat. There it is. We use the blue, not the blue. It just stands up a bit better. No, instead of a yellow.
Okay, far too close together. Come on.
There we go. The blue boat's on starboard, and one of the first things we we ask ourselves is whether this blue boat is fetching the mark. Tom, can you explain fetching the mark?
Well, fetching a mark means that it will lay the mark without having to tack.
Okay. So the blue boat, the one on starboard approaching, is clearly quite fetching the mark there, and therefore is entitled to some sort of rights under 18.3, yeah?
Mm-hmm.
So 18.3 is talking about the boat that passes head to wind in the zone. Well, the port tack boat here, in order to round the mark, is going to have to pass head to wind in the zone. What?
Let's do it there to start with.
Okay. Go on then.
Okay, so he's in the middle of tacking. Now he completes the tack on the ley line to the barb, and he's fetching the barb, and the blue boat has to luff up to avoid it.
Which
Carry on, you're doing it.
Yeah, so the blue boat had to luff above head to wind, and therefore the green boat that passed head to wind in the zone has broken rule 18.3. She's not allowed to make that blue boat luff above close haul. The other one is that if the blue boat gets somehow inside somehow they ended up like this. When
So what's happened here is that the green boat tacked in front of the blue boat.
Okay.
And they ended up like that.
And the other part of 18.3 says the green boat must not now cause the blue boat to miss the mark.
Right? The green boat must give marking to the blue boat.
Yep. Okay. So the other, I think the question they had was interesting because going back to the starting scenario, the starboard boat had borne away because she had overlapped or overstood.
Okay,
the
so
lane.
the green boat was up here because he'd overstood the mark. So he was reaching back towards the mark.
Nowhere near close hauled.
So when they tacked, this boat tacked, the green boat may, and we don't know from the facts that we were given, the green boat may have been able to avoid him simply by coming up closer to close haul. So in that case, the blue boat did not break 18.3. It didn't force the green boat to go above close haul.
So it's all about that close haul course of the starboard boat, isn't it?
Yeah.
If they're way off close haul, if they're reaching in, then the one on port actually has the right to say, up you go to close haul.
But it's a difficult call for the port boat. He's going to have some convincing to do to convince the Protest Committee that the green boat was indeed above the ley line and reaching down.
Okay. Can we just check the chat? I think we almost threw most of the questions we got, unless you can think of any that I haven't been through.
Whether
You want to do the one about this one?
well, that's the passing mark. That's question 3. Oh. Here we go.
Which one's that? Well, there was one that doesn't really need the board, Leon. Maybe you can, if we don't need the whiteboard.
Okay.
Maybe.
Well, the first that question was about the 16.2, the difference between the new and the old version. Well, I hope we've explained that the new version limits 16.2 to off-wind legs.
There's a question here about the notice of race and the sailing instructions, and it's not really an on the water question, but to summarize, the change of the rules about the notice of race and sailing instructions have effectively made it clearer to race organizers that they should put the information into the notice of race, which would help a competitor decide whether to enter that race, and that should be sent out early enough for competitors to do that. At the same time, they have tried to cut out a little bit of the duplication that happened in the notice of race and the sailing instructions. So the notice of race helps competitors decide whether they should enter, gives them the information about what class rules are going to be there, the times, the dates, all of that kind of stuff, where the race is going to be. Whereas the sailing instructions now have been more focused on the actual event itself. Is that a good way of explaining
That's a good way of putting it.
So I think that's going to help as well. They've changed the guidance for race committees on how to write those two documents. So we should see that clearing up a little bit. I don't know if there's anything else I can think of. We've been going an hour and 10 minutes.
I think that's probably enough.
I think we're probably good. I'm guessing.
Are there any final questions from anybody out there in Zoom land?
Okay, there was one there asking again just a little bit about the SE spinnaker, I guess on the bowsprit, not counting at the finish line.
Right, well, the same rule applies at the finish as applies at the start, which is that the boat finishes when its hull crosses the finish line. So it doesn't finish when the spinnaker crosses the finish line. Actually, that's very good because we had a situation under the current rules about whether the spinnaker was in its normal position or not. And people would let the spinnaker go out a bit in front to try and gain a few yards.
The ease of your spinnaker sheet, and hopefully you eased it in front of your competitor and try and finish. And then they said, well, why don't you put that normal position bit in? But it was still hard for the race officers to mark that finish. So
And anyway, that's very clear now.
yeah.
The boat finishes when its hull first crosses the finish line.
Tom and Ben, can you hear me?
Yes.
Absolutely.
It's Dave here. I still don't think that the mark rounding at the leeward mark was explained very succinctly as to who has mark room initially and when the other boat gets mark room. And your course to sail after the mark was 90 degrees, whereas normally you're sailing back up north again. So that would affect that rule 18.
Okay.
Can you explain it a little bit more with a little bit more?
Let's go back to that diagram. Okay. This diagram was drawn specifically to illustrate this change in the rules. It's not a general situation, although it does, the rule obviously applies under all situations. So, yes, both boats have to sail off at 90 degrees to the next mark. That was how it was set up in this diagram. Now, if you like to ask the questions, we'll try and answer them step by step.
Okay, so let's put the course coming from the north as it is in this, and both boats have to go back up to where they came from. It's a windward-leeward course.
Okay. Well, the blue boat is entitled to alter course to windward to assume a close haul course and as close to the mark as he wants to make it.
Okay, so that doesn't affect Rule 18.
No, well, it only affects this part of Rule 18.
Yes, exactly, yeah.
If the course was to go back upwind, then the blue boat has not yet been given mark room.
What I'm getting at, Tom, is Rule 18 turns off in entirety.
When the boat has been given mark room.
Yes.
So we get to the definition of mark room, and the last part of that definition says mark room is room to sail the course as necessary. To round the mark is necessary to sail the course. So if this was back to a beat, going back up to windward mark, boat number 4, the blue boat in position 4, actually is entitled to more mark room to turn onto her close haul course.
But what you said earlier on was that at point 3, yellow boat is entitled to mark room.
Well,
As
under
inside boat.
the old rule, the rules until the end of this year, yes, it is, because at point 3, the blue boat has been given mark room.
Yes.
He's not entitled to sail any higher than he is in position 3. Because he's
This is quite difficult, Tom, because
well, I did say
blue boat as mark room can go directly to the mark.
yeah, blue boat could have sailed closer to the mark from the beginning.
I think
Yes.
the blue boat wanted to do that. It should have done it in positions 1 and 2.
Yes, he could have sailed very close to the mark at the beginning.
That's what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that if they're going back up to windward, it is more than likely that the blue boat will go directly to the mark.
Oh, absolutely, yes, of course. But
So at what stage in that case yellow would never ever become right-of-way boat, or sorry, mark room boat.
Yeah, I think you're right there, Dave, and I think that's the key, is that we mentioned before this session tonight. I said we don't often see a reach after a lured mark. It doesn't come up much in our racing in Hong Kong. We normally have a lured mark going straight uphill again.
Yeah.
So it doesn't really come up.
Yeah.
But you're right. You just got to think, okay, is Blue being given all that she needs to be able to sail this course? Well, if it was a beat up to the top, not yet. And so therefore,
Yeah, what I'm saying is that it is highly unlikely that Blue would do what is done in this diagram and leave enough room for yellow to sneak into the mark.
in Hong Kong, yeah. But it does.
Yeah, well, in any racing, in any normal racing, with
I don't know.
Blue would tighten up and come directly to the mark.
Pretty random fact landings in Hong Kong. So
Dave, originally when I first drew this slide, I said it was technicality and we won't deal any more with it. Then we got a question from somebody asking us to explain the difference between the existing rule and the new rule in this particular circumstance. So I was afraid we'd end up with this conversation because it is quite technical and occurs very seldom.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, I think we're moving on. I just want to answer a quick question from someone here who says, what if the race committee can't see the hulls of the boat? Well, I don't think that changes anything from what is the situation now. And the race officer, if they can't see the hull of the boat, they have to extrapolate. I don't know how they do that. I'm not a race officer. But you know, sometimes the boat behind is obscured and they have to make a decision which one finished first. Patrick asks a quick question about 18.3. Boat A changes from port tack to starboard tack and meets another starboard boat B. A does not have mark room, tacking inside the zone, nor does have the light. I think.
Well, that's not the case. Assuming that A has not, which is the boat that is just tacking, has not forced the original starboard boat to go above close haul, and A has ended up inside the original starboard boat, then A does have mark room under Rule 18.2a.
Yeah, and has the right of way under Rule 11. So,
yeah.
So long as the tacking boat didn't break 18.3, the tacking boat is now inside boat under 18.2, has mark room, and also is the lured boat under Rule 11. So it does have right and has the mark room. A lot of people say you can't tack in the zone. You actually can, but you have to be careful and not break the Rule 18.3 when you do it. And you can enjoy rides to mark room and right away.
But it's difficult to convince the protest committee that you didn't break the rule.
Correct. So Dave, I think we can come back to that maybe off this seminar. The other two questions that we've answered, I think we should let people have a sit and think about that, and maybe we can provide some other way to bring up comments. What do you think? So,
any final questions before we close it up?
Final questions. Okay,
all right, everybody. Thank you very much for taking part in this session. It's not the easiest of things to do on Zoom, both with technical issues at this end and me struggling to keep my mask on. So thank you very much.
I'd like to also thank very much the Hebe Yacht Club for sharing their Zoom account and hosting the location and putting this together. Thank you all for joining in, and we'll try and work out a way for you to ask any more questions either on Facebook, I don't know, we'll work it out. All right, so with that, have a Merry Christmas, people. If you can somehow make the most of this COVID Christmas, and we hope to be back on the water pretty soon, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Sitting here.
Wait until we end the meeting.